You know, I've been watching the news these past few days like the rest of you, and I have to tell you something that most Americans haven't fully grasped yet. What happened on February 20th, 2026, wasn't just another court ruling. It wasn't just another political headline you scroll past on your phone. What happened was the opening shot in what I can only describe as a constitutional war. And most people, the honest truth is, most people have no idea what the President of the United States just declared against the highest court in the land. Now look, I've sat in that chair in the Oval Office. I've disagreed with the Supreme Court. Every president has. But there is a line, an invisible line that every president before this one understood you do not cross. And on February 20th, that line wasn't just crossed. It was obliterated. And we'll come back to exactly what that means in a moment, because the implications of what's unfolding right now will shape this country for generations. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the facts here matter more than anything. On February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that President Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to impose sweeping global tariffs was unconstitutional. Now, I want you to understand what this means. 6 justices, including 3 conservative justices appointed by Republican presidents, looked at what this administration was doing and said no. This is not how American democracy works. The power to regulate commerce, to impose tariffs, belongs to Congress, not to one man sitting in the White House. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. And here's what people need to understand. Roberts, Gorsuch, Barrett, these aren't liberal activists. These are conservative jurists who believe in the Constitution. They joined with Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson because the law was clear. IEPA was never designed for this. It was written in 1977 to handle genuine national emergencies, sanctions, asset freezes, not to give any president the power to unilaterally reshape global trade. Now, in a functioning democracy, that should have been the end of it. The court speaks, the executive branch complies, and we move forward within the constitutional framework our founders designed. But that's not what happened. And what happened next is what should concern every American, regardless of which party they belong to. Within hours of the ruling, President Trump took to Truth Social. And I want you to hear exactly what he said, because these are not my words. These are the words of the sitting President of the United States describing the highest court in his own country. He called the justices idiots. He called them lapdogs of the rhinos. He called them unpatriotic. He accused them of being manipulated by what he called foreign interests. And then he did something that I have never seen any president do in my lifetime. He suggested, publicly, that the solution was to expand the Supreme Court from 9 justices to 21. Now, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because most people heard that and thought it was just Trump being Trump. Just another outrageous statement in an endless stream of outrageous statements. But this is different. This is a sitting president, facing a constitutional check on his power, responding not by accepting the ruling, not by working with Congress, but by threatening to fundamentally restructure the judicial branch to ensure it never rules against him again. Let me tell you something from experience. Franklin Roosevelt, one of the greatest presidents in American history, tried something similar in 1937. He was frustrated with a conservative court striking down New Deal programs. He proposed adding justices to tip the balance in his favor. And you know what happened? His own party stopped him. Democrats in the Senate said no, because they understood that the independence of the judiciary is not a partisan issue. It is the foundation of everything else. Once you make the courts subservient to the president, you don't have a democracy anymore. You have something else entirely. And here's what most people are missing. Trump didn't just float this idea casually. He called it a temporary measure. But let me ask you something. When in history has any expansion of executive power ever been temporary? When has any president, having gained new authority, voluntarily given it back? The answer is never, and everyone in Washington knows it. Now, I want to take you behind the scenes of what's really happening here, because the surface story is only part of it. Within hours of the IEPA ruling, the Trump administration had already pivoted. They didn't accept defeat. They found another door. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, a provision that allows the president to impose temporary tariffs of up to 15% for up to 150 days to address balance of payments emergencies. Think about what that tells you. They had this ready. They knew they might lose at the Supreme Court, and they had the backup plan waiting. This isn't an administration caught off guard. This is an administration that views court rulings not as binding decisions, but as obstacles to navigate around. The new executive order imposed a 10% global tariff on all imports. Within 24 hours, they raised it to the maximum 15%. And the message was clear. You can rule against us all you want. We'll find another way. And if we run out of ways, we'll change the court itself. Now, here's where things start to get really complicated. The 150-day limit on Section 122 tariffs means this new legal framework expires in July. What happens then? Does the administration find yet another statute to exploit? Do they declare a new emergency? Or do they return to Congress and actually seek the legislative authority the Constitution requires? I can tell you what I fear. I fear that we are entering a cycle where the executive branch treats every legal constraint as a temporary inconvenience, where the response to losing in court is not compliance, but escalation, where the ultimate goal is not to work within the system, but to break the system until it stops resisting. And let me be clear about something. This affects everyone. If you're a business owner trying to plan for the future, how do you make decisions when tariff rates can change overnight based on one man's social media posts? If you're a farmer whose exports depend on stable trade relationships, how do you invest when the rules keep shifting? If you're an American consumer, you're already paying higher prices for everything from electronics to groceries. And none of this went through Congress. Not a single vote. Not a single hearing. That's not governance. That's improvisation with people's livelihoods. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't make the headlines as easily as court rulings and tariff rates, but matters just as much. The rhetoric. The language a president uses about the institutions of government shapes how the public perceives those institutions. And when the President of the United States calls Supreme Court justices idiots and unpatriotic, he isn't just expressing frustration. He's deliberately undermining public confidence in the judiciary. Here's what I learned in my years in public life. Democratic erosion doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. It happens one norm at a time, one institution at a time, one insult at a time, until one day you look around and realize the guardrails are gone. When Trump called the justices lapdogs of the rhinos, he was sending a message to his supporters. Don't trust the courts. When he accused them of serving foreign interests, he was laying the groundwork for ignoring future rulings. When he floated expanding the court to 21 justices, he was testing the waters to see how much the public would tolerate. And here's what concerns me most. A significant portion of the country heard all of that and nodded along. Because they've been told for years that the institutions are corrupt, that the system is rigged, that the only person they can trust is one man. That's not conservatism. That's not even populism. That's the beginning of something much darker. Now, most people are going to switch off right about now. They're going to think they've got the story. Court ruled against Trump. Trump got angry. End of story. But if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to show you what's really at stake here. Because this isn't just about tariffs. This is about the fundamental question of whether America remains a nation of laws or becomes something else entirely. Let me take you back in history for a moment, because I think it's important to understand that we've faced moments like this before. In 1832, the Supreme Court ruled in Worcester versus Georgia that the state of Georgia had no authority over Cherokee lands. President Andrew Jackson reportedly said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." And the trail of tears followed. Thousands of Native Americans died because a president decided he didn't have to listen to the courts. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled in Dred Scott that African Americans could never be citizens. It was one of the worst decisions in the court's history. But even that terrible ruling was eventually addressed through constitutional amendment and civil war. The system, however painfully, however slowly, corrected itself. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that segregation was unconstitutional. Southern governors defied the ruling. Eisenhower had to send federal troops to Little Rock to enforce it. But he did, because he understood that the president's job is to uphold the law, not to pick which laws he feels like following. That's the tradition Trump is breaking, not the tradition of disagreeing with the court. Every president does that. The tradition of accepting that the court has the final word on what the Constitution means. The tradition of working within the system even when the system rules against you. And here's what makes this moment different from all those others. In 1832, Jackson didn't have Twitter. In 1954, Eisenhower couldn't reach 80 million followers with a single post. The ability to shape public opinion, to delegitimize institutions, to build a movement that rejects judicial authority, that's new. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. Now, let me talk about what I see as the possible paths forward, because I think the American people deserve to understand where this might go. There are several scenarios, and they lead to very different outcomes. The first scenario is that Congress steps up. The Constitution gave the legislature the power over tariffs for a reason. If the Supreme Court just told the president he can't use IEEPA for trade policy, then Congress has an opportunity, and I would say a responsibility, to legislate clearly, define the boundaries, reclaim the authority the founders intended. There are Republicans and Democrats who believe in congressional prerogative. This is the moment to act on it. The second scenario is the one we're on right now. The administration keeps finding alternative legal authorities. Section 122 today, something else tomorrow. Every new mechanism gets challenged in court, and we enter a cycle of litigation, uncertainty, executive orders, and more litigation. Businesses can't plan. Allies can't trust our trade commitments. And the constitutional question never gets resolved. It just keeps shifting to the next statute. The third scenario is the one that concerns me most in the near term. If the administration continues to lose in court, and if they continue to respond with threats to restructure the judiciary, we could find ourselves in a full-blown legitimacy crisis. A president who openly campaigns against the courts, who tells his supporters that the justices are corrupt and unpatriotic, who threatens to pack the bench with loyalists. That's not a president operating within the system. That's a president at war with the system. And the fourth scenario, the one I pray we never reach, is that the administration simply stops complying. They've already shown they view court rulings as obstacles to navigate around. What happens when they run out of alternative statutes? What happens when every legal avenue has been closed? Do they comply? Or do they declare that the courts have no authority to restrain them? I don't know which path we'll take, but I know this. The ball is in Congress's court now, and it's in yours. Now, I want to address something directly, because I think it needs to be said. There are people watching this who support President Trump. There are people who believe the tariffs are good policy, that America needs to get tough on trade, that the courts are out of touch with what ordinary Americans want. And I respect that perspective. I've been in politics long enough to know that reasonable people can disagree about policy. But here's what I would ask you to consider. Even if you believe the tariffs are right, even if you believe the Supreme Court was wrong, do you really want to live in a country where the president can simply ignore court rulings he doesn't like? Do you really want to set that precedent? Because here's the thing about precedents. They don't just apply to the president you support. They apply to every president who comes after. If Trump can pack the court to 21 justices because he lost a tariff case, what stops the next Democratic president from packing it to 35 because they lost on abortion or immigration or climate change? If Trump can call justices idiots and unpatriotic and still claim to be a defender of the Constitution, what stops the next president from going even further? The rules we set today bind everyone tomorrow. That's why they matter. That's why I fought to preserve them when I was in office, even when it was politically costly to do so. Because I understood that the presidency doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the country. And the restraint a president shows, especially when he's angry, that restraint is what separates governing from destroying. Let me tell you something else I learned sitting in that chair. The most important decisions a president makes aren't the ones that get applause. They're the ones that require discipline. They're the moments when you have the power to do something, and you choose not to because it would damage the office for everyone who comes after you. I had those moments. Every president has those moments. And how you handle them defines your presidency more than any legislative victory or military operation ever could. What President Trump is doing right now is the opposite of that discipline. He had the power to accept a court ruling and work with Congress on a constitutional solution. He had the power to show the country that even when he loses, the system works. He had the power to demonstrate that no one, not even the president, is above the law. Instead, he chose to attack the court. He chose to threaten the institution. He chose to tell the American people that the justices are corrupt, unpatriotic, and serving foreign interests. And he floated the idea of packing the court with enough new justices to guarantee he never loses again. That's not leadership. That's not strength. That's a man who can't accept that the Constitution limits his power. And that should concern everyone, regardless of party. Now, I want to close with something personal because I think it's important. I've spent most of my life in public service. I've made mistakes, some of them very public. I've had moments I'm proud of and moments I wish I could do over. But through all of it, there's one thing I never lost faith in, and that's the idea that America is governed by laws, not by the will of any single person. The founders didn't create a perfect system. They knew they couldn't. But they created a system with checks and balances precisely because they understood human nature. They understood that power corrupts. They understood that every leader, no matter how well-intentioned, needs constraints. The courts exist to provide those constraints, not as enemies of the executive branch, but as essential partners in a functioning democracy. When a president attacks the courts, when he calls the justices idiots and threatens to expand the bench until it bends to his will, he's not fighting for the American people. He's fighting against the very system that protects their rights. So here's what I'll ask of you. Stay informed. Not angry, informed. Pay attention to what's happening. Understand that the headlines about tariffs and trade wars are really headlines about something much more fundamental. They're about whether we still believe in the rule of law, whether we still believe that the Constitution means what it says, whether we still believe that no one is above it. Vote, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Hold every leader accountable, including the ones you agree with, especially the ones you agree with. Because democracy doesn't survive on autopilot. It survives because ordinary people decide every single day that it's worth protecting. I still believe in this country. I still believe we can right the ship. Not because I'm naive. Lord knows I've seen too much for that. But because I've seen Americans do it before. We've corrected course after wars, after scandals, after economic collapse. We've done it when the odds were long and the divisions were deep. We can do it again, but only if we choose to. Only if we remember that the real power in this country has never been in the Oval Office. It's always been with you. Now that you know the truth, now that you understand what was really declared on February 20th, the question isn't what the president will do next. The question is what you will do. Are you prepared to defend the Constitution? Are you prepared to demand that your representatives hold the line? Are you prepared to be a citizen, not just a spectator? Because that's what this moment requires. Not outrage, not despair. Citizenship. Active, engaged, informed citizenship. That's how democracies survive. That's how they always have. Thank you for sitting with me through this. Thank you for staying to the end. Most people don't. Most people switch off when things get complicated. But you didn't. And that tells me something about the kind of American you are. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America. This video represents independent political analysis and commentary for educational purposes. The views expressed are interpretive assessments based on publicly available information and historical parallels, presented through an analytical framework inspired by the perspective of experienced political leadership.